What would you do if your entire career disappeared overnight? If everything you'd worked for vanished, leaving you to start over at 50? Tonight's story is about David Harrison, a man who spent 3 years invisible, driving in silence, watching his world shrink to the size of a car's front seat. But sometimes our deepest struggles prepare us for our greatest moments. Sometimes the skills we think we've lost are exactly what someone desperately needs. This is a story about bridge building, about second chances, and about the moment when invisibility becomes impossible. If you're going through a difficult season, if you feel unseen or undervalued, this story is for you. Please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let's begin this remarkable journey together. I haven't heard Japanese in 20 years. When CEO's driver revealed his shocking past, the Lincoln Continental cut through Manhattan's Fifth Avenue like a blade through still, water windshield wipers struggling against October rain that turned the city into watercolor. Inside the cabin, temperature held steady at 72 degrees, but no amount of climate control could address the ice forming behind the partition. David Harrison's eyes tracked brake lights ahead while his passenger's voice climbed toward hysteria. 3 years driving this route. 3 years learning which traffic lights turned yellow half a second early, which potholes to avoid, which lanes move fastest during rush hour. 3 years of listening to conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. Elena Morrison's reflection fractured across the rearview mirror as she pressed her phone against her ear, mascara tracking dark rivers down her cheeks. The woman who'd graced Business Week 18 months ago, the tech innovator who revolutionized supply chain logistics, now looked like someone who'd forgotten how to win. Her voice cracked through the phone speaker. "Richard, that's impossible. All 5 agencies, there has to be someone." David's knuckles went white against the steering wheel. He knew this tone. Desperation wearing executive armor. "The delegation lands in 4 hours, Richard." 4 hours. Elena's free hand clawed through her hair, destroying what remained of the updo her stylist had spent 40 minutes perfecting. "This is an $800 million merger. If Yamamoto and Rahman walk away, we file Chapter 11 in 90 days. The jazz station played something mournful, a saxophone solo that belonged anywhere but here. David reached for the volume knob, his fingertips brushing chrome. "Don't touch my controls." The words landed like a physical blow. David's hand froze midair, hovering over the dashboard as if the air itself had solidified. Elena's eyes found his in the mirror, sharp enough to draw blood. "You're the driver. Remember your place." The partition rose with a mechanical hiss, cutting her reflection in half, then into nothing. David's hand dropped to his lap. His jaw worked silently, grinding molars that had survived 52 years without cracking. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. David eased off the accelerator, bringing the Continental to a stop so smooth the coffee in Elena's cup holder didn't ripple. Muscle memory, the kind of precision that came from repetition until your body performed without consulting your brain. His phone buzzed against his thigh. A text from Jessica, his daughter. "Dad, Stanford financial aid called about next semester. They need $8,500 by Monday." Monday was 4 days away. David's thumb hovered over his banking app. The numbers stared back with arithmetic's cold indifference. Checking $3, $847. Savings $6, $392. The savings was supposed to last through Jessica's entire medical degree. 2 more years. He'd already done the math 100 times. It didn't work. It never worked. Behind the partition, Elena's voice rose and fell like waves trying to erode granite. David had heard these calls before to investors' partners, her ex-husband's attorney. She always sounded like this when reality refused to bend to her will. The light turned green. David accelerated smooth as silk while Jessica's text burned a hole in his pocket like unspent currency. Georgetown 1997. Professor Whitmore had stood at the lecture hall podium, arms crossed, imposed a question. "Your interpreter just collapsed during nuclear disarmament negotiations. The Russian delegation speaks no English. The American team speaks no Russian. You have 30 seconds to prevent World War III. Go." David had raised his hand. "Find someone bilingual who understands context well enough not to trigger an international incident." Whitmore had smiled. "And if you can't find that person, then you become that person." The memory tasted like dust. Becoming that person had required a PhD, a master's degree, 25 years at the State Department, and a career that ended with a form letter thanking him for his service. Budget cuts. Position eliminated. Good luck. That was 3 years ago. 340 applications sent. Overqualified for some. Too old for the rest. Nobody wanted a 50-year-old diplomat in a world that worshipped 25-year-old disruptors. His phone buzzed again. Jessica, Dad, don't worry about the money. I can take next semester off, work, save up. David's chest constricted. The next text arrived before he could respond. Stanford said they'd hold my spot for a year. It's fine, Dad. You've done enough. She didn't know. Jessica thought her father was a linguistics consultant working from home, making enough to cover tuition and his mother's medical bills. She thought the monthly deposits came from research grants and translation contracts. She didn't know her father wore a chauffeur's cap and spent 8 hours daily driving a woman who called him the help. The Continental rolled through another intersection. Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere distant, a siren wailed. Elena's voice penetrated the partition again louder. Mother, I don't have time for this. A pause. Yes, I know you warned me about expanding too fast. You've mentioned it several times. Another pause. I have to go. The partition lowered halfway. Elena's face appeared in the gap, mascara stained and furious. I need coffee. Starbucks on 52nd. David nodded. Yes, ma'am. And don't call me ma'am. It makes me sound ancient. The partition rose before he could respond. David changed lanes, already calculating the route. Right turn half a block in meter parking. If lucky, loading zone, if not. 6 months ago, Elena had used Google Translate for an email to Korean partners. She'd meant to write, "We look forward to productive partnership." What she'd actually sent translated closer to, "We expect you to obey." The deal collapsed within 48 hours. David had been driving her from the airport when her phone rang with the news. He'd listened to her rage at her legal team, her CTO, the universe itself. And when silence finally came, he'd spoken quietly. Miss Morrison, I think there might have been a translation. I didn't hire you to think. Her voice could have frozen nitrogen. I hired you to drive. So drive. He'd driven. $32 million evaporated into the Pacific. Berlin 1 year ago. German delegation walked out because Elena's legal team used phrasing that in German corporate law implied Morrison Industries would claim full IP ownership. David had read the contract while waiting in the parking garage, killing time. He'd seen the problem immediately. Mr. Morrison, think Clause 9 might be interpreted. David. She hadn't looked up from her phone. No one pays you for opinions about contracts. Eyes on the road. The German company signed with a competitor. 40 million gone. 12 times in 3 years. 12 times David had seen disasters approaching and tried to warn her. 12 times she'd reminded him that his job description didn't include thinking. So he'd stopped trying. He'd learned to drive in silence and cash his paychecks and lie to his daughter about research grants that didn't exist. The Starbucks line stretched out the door. David found a loading zone hazards on and waited while Elena disappeared inside. Through the window, he watched her push to the front, still pressed to her ear. Nobody challenged her. That was Elena's superpower, absolute certainty that the world would accommodate her because she demanded it. Except the world wasn't accommodating anymore. David had heard enough phone calls over 6 months to piece together the picture. Morrison Industries was bleeding cash. Their flagship product undercut by competitors. 2 major clients jumped ship. The board getting nervous. This merger with Yamamoto Corporation and Rahman Group was supposed to save everything. But you couldn't negotiate an $800 million international merger without someone who understood cultural bridges. And all the professional interpreters were booked with a Singapore tech conference. Elena emerged carrying a Venti something or other phone still attached to her ear. She yanked the back door hard enough that David felt the car rock. Rebecca listened very carefully. Elena's voice had gone quiet, which was worse than shouting. Call every contact we have. Universities, the UN language line, if necessary. Find me someone who speaks Japanese and Malay and can handle business negotiations. David's fingers drummed the steering wheel once, twice, then he forced them still. I don't care what it costs. Elena's coffee sloshed as the car merged into traffic. 20,000 for 2 days. Fine, 30, whatever. Just find someone before 7 tonight. 7 o'clock, that's when Yamamoto Corporation's advance team arrived at the St. Regis for preliminary discussions. Casual drinks, cultural pleasantries, the kind of meeting that seemed inconsequential but could destroy everything if you didn't understand unspoken rules. David had mediated those meetings for 25 years. He knew Yamamoto Hiroshi had founded his company in 1954, which meant he valued legacy over quarterly profits. He knew Japanese business culture treated gifts as language too cheap, suggested disrespect too expensive, suggested bribery. He knew seating arrangements mattered, that silence communicated more than speech, that a bow could mean anything from casual courtesy to profound apology depending on angle and duration. He knew all this, and Elena didn't know he knew any of it because she'd never asked. His phone buzzed. Jessica again. Seriously, Dad, don't stress. I can defer. It's not the end of the world. Except it was. Jessica had wanted to be a pediatric oncologist since age 9, since watching her grandmother, David's mother, Ruth, start treatment for early-stage dementia. Ruth had survived that scare. The condition returned last year, Meaner settling into her mind like smoke into fabric. Progressive, 6 to 12 months of clarity remaining with treatment. Treatment cost $4,000 monthly after Medicare. Jessica's tuition was $34,000 per semester. David's driver's salary was $48,000 annually. He'd been living off his State Department severance package. That fund was down to $6,000. At current burn rate, it would be gone by Christmas. Then what? The Continental glided to a stop at another red light. David's eyes found Elena in the rearview. She'd abandoned phone calls, now texting furiously, thumbs blurring across the screen. Her coffee sat forgotten, cooling into expensive beige sludge. He'd worked for her 3 years. In that time, he'd learned things about Elena Morrison that never made business. Weak. He'd learned she called her daughter Emma exactly twice monthly, always Sundays, and the calls always ended with Emma saying something that made Elena's face go tight. He'd learned Elena's ex-husband sent monthly emails she deleted unread. He'd learned she worked 16-hour days not from love of work, but because the alternative was going home to an empty penthouse that cost more monthly than most people earned yearly. He'd learned Elena Morrison was brilliant and ruthless and terrified. The terror was new. It had crept into her voice over 6 months as the company deteriorated. David recognized it because he'd felt it 3 years ago standing in his supervisor's office at State, listening to words like restructuring and difficult decisions, and knowing his entire professional identity was about to be erased. Elena's phone rang. She answered before the first ring finished. "Richard, please tell me you found someone." The pause stretched long enough for David to hear his own heartbeat. "I see." Elena's voice went flat. "And the backup agencies, none of them, not even triple rates." Another pause. Elena's free hand formed a fist, knuckles white. "Fine. Thank you for trying." She ended the call and immediately dialed another number. "Mom, I know we just talked, but I need—" Her voice cracked. "I'm losing everything and I don't know how to fix it." David kept his eyes forward. This felt too private, too raw. He shouldn't be hearing this. But the partition was down and sound traveled, and there was nowhere else for either of them to go. Eleanor Morrison's voice filtered through the speaker, warm and steady. "Honey, what's actually happening? Not the business. You. I don't have time for therapy." Elena's laugh could have drawn blood. "I have 3 hours to find a miracle or watch $800 million walk away. And if that happens, the board votes me out. Everything I built—" "Elena," Eleanor's voice cut through the spiral. "When did you start measuring your worth by stock price? When I was 15 and Dad died and you worked yourself into exhaustion paying for Columbia tuition." Elena's voice went quieter, almost gentle. "I swore I'd never be poor again. Never powerless. And now you're learning power and control are different things." Eleanor sighed. "Baby, I love you, but pride has always been your weakness. I have to go." Elena ended the call before her mother could respond. The Continental rolled through the financial district, past glass towers, reflecting gray sky back at itself. David had worked in buildings like these once. Different city, different context, but the same architecture of ambition. His phone buzzed. Not Jessica. Riverside Care, where his mother lived. He let it go to voicemail, already knowing what they wanted. Money. Always money. The kind he didn't have. "Pull over." Elena's voice was rough. "I need air." David found a spot near Battery Park sliding into a loading zone. Elena climbed out without waiting for him to open her door, walking to the railing overlooking the harbor. Wind off the water whipped her hair into a golden storm. David stayed in the driver's seat. This wasn't an invitation. This was a woman trying to hold herself together, and the last thing she needed was an audience. But he could see her reflection in the side mirror, see her shoulders shake, see her wipe at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara into war paint. His phone buzzed. Voicemail notification. David pressed play. "Mr. Harrison, this is Margaret from Riverside Care calling about your mother's account. We've been patient, but we're 45 days past due on September, and October is due next week. If we don't receive payment by Friday, we'll need to discuss alternative arrangements for Mrs. Harrison's care." Alternative arrangements. Code for discharging his dying mother to somewhere cheaper, somewhere without specialized memory care support, somewhere she'd spend her final months in a facility that smelled like industrial cleaner and defeat. David deleted the voicemail. His reflection in the mirror looked back, gray-haired, weathered, wearing a suit that cost more than he made bi-weekly. The irony wasn't lost. Elena turned from the railing, walking back to the car. Her face was composed now, the CEO mask restored. Only her eyes betrayed her, red-rimmed and exhausted. She settled into the back seat without speaking. The partition stayed down. They drove in silence for 10 minutes. Midtown traffic was murder gridlock of taxis, delivery trucks, tourists jaywalking like they'd never heard of mortality. David navigated it all with the patience of someone who'd learned rushing never got you there faster. "Tell me something, David." Elena's voice startled him. She almost never used his first name. "Ma'am, how long have you worked for me?" 3 years, Miss Morrison." 3 years. She tasted the words, finding them strange. "In 3 years, have you ever seen me fail at anything?" The answer required diplomatic precision. "I've seen you face challenges." "That's not what I asked." David chose words carefully. "I've seen you build a company from nothing. I've seen you close deals other CEOs called impossible. I've seen you refuse to quit when anyone else would have walked away." But the words escaped before David could stop them. "But I've also seen you try to do everything yourself." 3 years of silence breaking. "Because asking for help would mean admitting you don't have all the answers." The air went very still. "You're the driver, David," Elena said slowly, "not my therapist." "Yes, ma'am. My apologies." Another red light. They stopped. Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere distant, a siren wailed. Elena's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "It's Yamamoto's office." She answered, voice suddenly bright and professional. "Mr. Yamamoto, what a pleasure. I was just—" She stopped, listened, color drained further. "I see. Yes, I understand. May I ask?" Another pause. "Of course. Cultural sensitivity. Absolutely." She lowered the phone but didn't end the call, just held it against her chest like a talisman that had failed. "He's not coming." Her voice was barely audible. "Ma'am." "Yamamoto Hiroshi himself. He's on the advance team. He never travels for preliminary meetings." "That's unusual," David said carefully. "It means he's worried we're not serious." Elena's fingers went white around the phone. "It means one wrong move tonight, and he pulls out entirely. Ms. Morrison, if I may." "You may not." She raised the phone. "Mr. Yamamoto's still here." "Yes, 7 o'clock at the St. Regis. We'll be ready, thank you." She ended the call and immediately dialed another. "Rebecca Yamamoto Hiroshi is personally attending tonight. I need you to—" She listened, and whatever Rebecca said made her close her eyes. All of them. Every single contact. David watched her reflection crumble. "Keep trying." Elena's voice had gone hollow. "There has to be someone." She ended the call, sat in silence. Rain drummed against windows. "David," she spoke without looking up, "what languages do you speak?" The question landed like a grenade in the quiet car. David's heart rate kicked up 20 beats per minute. His palms went damp against leather. This was the moment. 3 years of waiting, and this was the moment. He could say just English and let it pass. Let her fail. Let the company collapse. Let himself stay safe in shadows, invisible and untouchable and slowly suffocating. Or he could speak. "Miss Morrison," he said quietly, "what languages do you need?" The silence that followed felt like standing at a cliff's edge, waiting to see if the ground beneath was solid or illusion. Elena's eyes met his in the mirror. What did you just say? For the merger. David's voice stayed steady despite the earthquake in his chest. Which languages do you need? That's not. She stopped herself, recalibrated. Japanese. Malay, probably. Korean would help for Samsung subsidiary clauses. David took a breath, let it out, slowly committed. I'm fluent in Japanese, Malay, Korean, and Mandarin, he said. Also Arabic and Spanish. I can read French and German. Elena stared through the mirror. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. You speak 7 languages. Yes, ma'am, fluently. And you never mentioned this because you never asked. David thought because in 3 years, you've never once inquired about my background, my education, my capabilities beyond navigating traffic. But he didn't say that. Instead, would you like me to prove it? Before Elena could answer, her phone rang. The name on the screen, Yamamoto Hiroshi, Tokyo Direct. She looked at the phone, looked at David, looked back at the phone. Her hand trembled as she passed it forward through the partition gap. Don't make me regret this, she whispered. David took the phone, raised it to his ear, and when he spoke, his voice transformed into something it hadn't been for 3 years, confident, warm, fluent in a language he'd learned from his mother before learning to read. Moshi Moshi Yamamoto-san. David Harrison to Moshimasu. Dozo yoroshiku onegaishimasu. The line went quiet for 3 heartbeats. Then Yamamoto Hiroshi's voice came through, cautious but intrigued, speaking rapid Japanese that would be incomprehensible to anyone without years of cultural immersion. David listened, nodded, though Yamamoto couldn't see, responded with precise formality that acknowledged both Yamamoto's seniority and potential partnership between equals. In the mirror, Elena's face cycled through expressions: shock, disbelief, hope, and something resembling fury at her own blindness. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. David switched between Japanese and Malay when another voice joined Rahman from the Malaysian manufacturing division. Technical terms flowed like water: intellectual property, market penetration, vertical integration, the vocabulary of international business in 3 languages, delivered with the ease of someone who'd spent 2 decades keeping the world from imploding. Finally, David bowed his head, slightly respectful. Yamamoto couldn't see, but would understand in tone, and concluded with perfect ritual courtesy. He handed the phone back. They're looking forward to meeting you this evening, he said calmly. The cultural misunderstanding has been addressed. Elena took the phone like it might explode. What cultural misunderstanding? Your legal team's preliminary contract used language implying Morrison Industries would maintain unilateral final decision authority. In Japanese business culture, that suggests you view them as subordinates rather than partners. David shifted into drive, merging into traffic with the same smooth precision he'd used for 3 years. I explained the phrasing was a translation oversight, that Morrison Industries deeply respects Yamamoto Corporation's 70-year legacy, and that you've personally studied Japanese corporate customs to demonstrate commitment. But I haven't. You have now. David kept his eyes forward. Mr. Yamamoto was particularly moved that you took time to learn about his father's work rebuilding Tokyo after the war. He said few Western executives show that cultural respect. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then, who are you? I'm your driver. Like hell you are. The Continental turned onto the street leading to Morrison Industries headquarters. The 40-story glass tower rose against gray sky like a monument to ambition that hadn't quite learned humility. Underground parking, Elena said. Then you're going to tell me everything. David nodded. The car descended into the building's concrete belly, fluorescent lights flickering past like a countdown to something irreversible. He found Elena's reserved spot, killed the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous. Elena didn't move to exit. Neither did Michael. I need to know everything, she said finally. Starting with why a man who speaks 7 languages and negotiates with Japanese CEOs has been driving my car for 3 years. David turned to face her directly for the first time. Through the partition gap, their eyes met without the mirror's filter. PhD in International Relations, Georgetown University, 1995, he began. Master's in Applied Linguistics, Harvard, 1993. Senior Economic Attaché, United States Department of State, 1995 to 22. 27 years. Elena's face went very still. Specialized in multilateral trade negotiations. G7 summits 2015, 2018, 2019. Lead attaché for U.S.-Japan trade negotiations 2017 to 220. Mediator for Okinawa Base Revision Accord 220. David pulled out his phone, showed her the presidential commendation. Budget cuts eliminated my position in 2022. I was 50. You sent applications. Not a question. 340. Got 2 interviews. Both said I was overqualified for entry level and too expensive for senior roles. He put the phone away. My mother was diagnosed with progressive dementia that month. My daughter's medical school tuition was due. I needed work immediately. Your company posted a driver position. I applied. For 3 years. For 3 years, I've driven and kept quiet. David's voice was level, factual, because I had no other options. Elena stepped out into harsh garage light. David followed, standing beside the Continental in his black suit and chauffeur's cap. She looked at him like seeing a ghost. 6 months ago. You tried to warn me. Yes. I told you to stay in your lane. Yes. Berlin, the German contract. You knew about Clause 9. I read the contract waiting for your meeting. The problem was obvious to anyone familiar with German corporate law. David met her eyes. I tried to tell you. You said you didn't pay me for opinions. How many times? 12. Over 3 years, I tried to warn you 12 times about problems I could have fixed. He didn't look away. After the 12th, I stopped trying. The parking garage was silent except for distant ventilation hum and the tick of cooling engine. Why didn't you quit? Find something else. Ms. Morrison, I sent 340 applications in 2022. Know how many I've sent since? 0. He took off his cap, held it in both hands. Because I learned the market doesn't want 50-year-old former diplomats. It wants 25-year-old disruptors who will work for half my old salary. He paused. I have a daughter 3 months from finishing her 3rd year at Stanford Medical. She wants to be a pediatric oncologist because she watched her grandmother fight dementia. Her tuition is $34,000 per semester. My mother's memory care costs $4,000 monthly after Medicare. My salary here is $48,000 annually. Elena did the math. Her face went pale. I've been living off State Department severance. That money runs out at Christmas. David's voice was quiet. So no, I didn't quit. Quitting meant my daughter drops out and my mother dies without care that might give her 6 more months of clarity. David, but I need you to understand something. He looked at her directly and for the first time in 3 years, let her see the man he'd been before desperation made him small. I didn't just drive for 3 years. I studied your company, learned your industry, read every contract that passed through your hands, listened to every conference call that bled through the partition. I prepared. For what? For the moment when you'd finally ask the right question. He smiled, tired but genuine. For the moment when you'd need exactly what I know how to do. Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, eyes widening. Rebecca says Yamamoto's advance team just arrived at the St. Regis early. They're asking about cultural protocols. Nobody knows what to tell them. David put his cap back on. In Japanese business culture, gifts should acknowledge their company's founding year, 1954, for Yamamoto. Not expensive, which implies buying influence, but thoughtful, showing respect for legacy. White peonies are traditional for business partnerships. They symbolize honor and prosperity without romantic implications. He started toward the building entrance. Seating by company age, not revenue. Yamamoto right side because they're older. Raman left. Morrison middle as host. Business cards exchanged with both hands, read carefully before being placed on the table, never pocketed. Elena hurried to catch up, heels clicking on concrete. How do you know all this? Because for 27 years I stood in rooms where my understanding of cultural nuance was the only thing preventing international incidents. He pushed the elevator button. This is what I do, Ms. Morrison. Or what I did before I became invisible. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. Elena pressed the executive floor button. You're not invisible anymore, she said quietly. The elevator rose through the building's glass and steel heart. David watched floor numbers climb and thought about Jessica, about his mother, about 3 years of silence finally breaking open. "Ms. Morrison," he said as the elevator slowed, "we have 2 hours and 43 minutes before Yamamoto and his team arrive. I need to change. You need to repair your makeup, and we both need to prepare for the most important meeting of your life." The doors opened. Rebecca Walsh stood waiting, face pale with stress. "Elena, thank God. Yamamoto's team is at the hotel. They want to meet in 90 minutes instead of 3 hours. Mr. Yamamoto doesn't want to waste time." Rebecca's words tumbled over each other. "And I still haven't found an interpreter." "We have an interpreter." Elena stepped out, the voice regaining command. "Rebecca, this is David Harrison. He'll handle all translation and cultural protocols." Rebecca's eyes went to David's uniform, then back to Elena. "I'm sorry, what?" "David holds a PhD from Georgetown and master's from Harvard. He was senior economic attaché at State for 27 years. He speaks 7 languages fluently." Elena's voice was crisp. "Any other questions?" Rebecca's mouth worked silently. Then, "Should he change before the meeting?" "We have 87 minutes. Victoria looked at David. "Can you be ready?" "I've been ready for 3 years, Ms. Morrison." He pulled out his phone, already scrolling contacts. "But I need you to trust me completely. No second guessing, no interruptions. When we're in that room with Yamamoto, you follow my lead on all cultural matters." Elena held his gaze. 70 people lose jobs if this fails, including you. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." The office erupted into controlled chaos. Rebecca pulled David toward executive wardrobe. Morrison Industries kept emergency suits for visiting executives. Elena disappeared into her office to repair damage. David found himself in a dressing room with designer suits. He chose navy Tom Ford, conservative, but well cut, with a silver tie suggesting competence without trying too hard. The transformation took 8 minutes. When he emerged, Rebecca waited with a tablet. "Everything we have on Yamamoto Corporation. Financial reports, org charts, press releases." David took it, scanning rapidly. His mind sorted information the way it had for 2 decades, filtering essential from noise, building mental maps of who these people were and what they valued. Yamamoto Hiroshi, 67, CEO and patriarch. Founded the company at 22 with money borrowed from his father-in-law. Built it from 3 people to 8,000 employees. Conservative, traditional. Valued loyalty and long-term thinking over quarterly profits. His son, Yamamoto Kenji, 39, executive VP, Harvard MBA, 3 years at McKinsey before joining family business. Reputation as hard negotiator, pushing his father toward aggressive expansion. And there, in a business journal footnote, a detail that made David smile. Yamamoto Hiroshi's father had worked alongside American engineers during Tokyo Reconstruction in the early 1950s. He'd specifically credited an engineer named Robert Sterling for teaching him that collaboration between former enemies could build something stronger than either could alone. David's father, Robert Harrison, civil engineer. Tokyo Reconstruction, 1947 to 1954. The pieces fell into place like a puzzle completing itself. Elena emerged from her office, transformed back into the polished executive who'd graced magazine covers. Hair perfect, makeup concealing earlier tears, charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than David made monthly. "You clean up well," she said, looking him over. "So do you." 90-minute briefing while Rebecca calls a car. Elena's eyes were sharp, again focused. "What do I absolutely need to know?" David set down the tablet. "Yamamoto Hiroshi's father worked with my father on Tokyo Reconstruction after the war. That gives us connection, foundation of trust between families. But only if we handle it correctly. We don't lead with it. We let it emerge naturally." "What else?" "He brought his son to this preliminary meeting. That's unusual and significant. Either Kenji pushed to attend because he's concerned, or Hiroshi brought him to demonstrate family unity. Either way, we address both as equals while respecting hierarchy." "Anything I should avoid?" "Don't be too effusive. Japanese culture values restraint. Don't fill silences. Silence is comfortable for them. And most importantly, don't thank them excessively. One sincere expression of gratitude is worth more than 10 casual ones." The elevator arrived. They rode down in silence. A black town car waited at street level. Rebecca had pulled strings. As they slid into the back seat, Elena turned to David. I need to say something before we do this. Miss Morrison, 3 years. Her voice was quiet. 3 years I had you right there and I never saw you. Not because you were invisible, but because I was too arrogant to look. David said nothing. My mother told me strength isn't about who you look down on, but who you still see when they're beneath you. Elena looked out at Manhattan sliding past. I failed that test badly. We can talk after. No, I need to say it now. She faced him. I'm sorry, David, for 3 years of waste, for every time I shut you down, for treating you like furniture instead of a human being. The apology hung in the air, fragile and real. Apologies later, David said gently. Right now, we have a company to save. The town car pulled up to the St. Regis. Through windows, David could see the lobby glittering with old-world elegance, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, the kind of luxury that whispered instead of shouted. Somewhere in that hotel, Yamamoto Hiroshi was waiting. Along with him, the future of 70 jobs, the future of Jessica's medical degree, the future of his mother's care, the future David had spent 3 years preparing for without knowing when it would arrive. Ready? Elena asked. David straightened his tie, centered himself. Let's build a bridge. They stepped out into Manhattan evening rain still falling soft as promises and walked through gold-framed doors into the next chapter of both their lives. The St. Regis lobby hummed with the quiet efficiency of money at rest, marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers that cast light like scattered diamonds. David had negotiated in places like this before, but never after 3 years of being invisible. Elena walked beside him, her heels clicking a steady rhythm against stone. Her posture had changed, shoulders back, chin, lifted, the CEO mask firmly in place. But David caught the slight tremor in her hands as she checked her watch. 7th floor, she said. The Rothschild suite. They rode the elevator in silence, each lost in their own preparation. David's mind was already shifting languages, cataloging the cultural landmines that could destroy everything before it began. Elena stared at her reflection in the polished doors, adjusting her jacket with the precision of armor being fitted. The elevator chimed softly. 7th floor. Rebecca waited in the hallway, tablet in hand, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. They're here, she said without preamble. Yamamoto-san, his son Kenji, and Dr. Rahman with 2 associates. They arrived 20 minutes ago. How do they seem? Elena asked. Professional? Polite? But I get the sense they're evaluating everything in the room to set up our staff, whether we ordered the right tea. Rebecca's voice carried an edge of panic. David, I had them arrange seating like you said, but I'm not sure. Show me, David said simply. Rebecca opened the suite doors. The room beyond was elegant without being ostentatious, a long table positioned to catch natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. White peonies sat in simple crystal vases, their placement suggesting respect rather than desperation. 5 men stood near the windows, engaged in quiet conversation. David's trained eye immediately identified the dynamics. Yamamoto Hiroshi at the center, silver-haired and dignified, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most cars. His son Kenji stood slightly to his right, younger, but carrying himself with the careful posture of someone accustomed to being watched. Juriem. Rahman, distinguished and confident, held court with 2 associates who listened more than they spoke. Mr. Yamamoto, Elena moved forward, her voice warm but not overeager. Thank you for making time on such short notice. Yamamoto-san turned and David immediately read the assessment in his eyes. This was a man who'd built a global company by understanding people in the first 30 seconds of meeting them. Ms. Morrison, Yamamoto's English was precise, accented, but clear. Please, the pleasure is ours. May I introduce my son Kenji and Dr. Rahman of Rahman Group. The introductions flowed with ritual precision. David hung back slightly, waiting for the moment when his presence would become necessary. It came sooner than expected. And this is David Harrison, Elena said, her voice carrying new confidence. He'll be facilitating our discussions today. Yamamoto's eyes shifted to David and something flickered across his face, curiosity, perhaps recognition of competence. Harrison-san, he said, then continued in Japanese. I understand you speak our language. David stepped forward, bowed precisely, 15 degrees respectful, but not subservient, and responded in equally formal Japanese. Yamamoto-san, it is an honor to meet you. Your company's reputation for innovation and integrity is well known in international business circles. A moment of silence. Then Yamamoto smiled, the first genuine expression David had seen from him. Your Japanese is excellent, Harrison-san. Where did you study? My mother was from Osaka. David replied in Japanese, then switched to English to include Elena and Dr. Rahman. And I had the privilege of working in your country for several years during my diplomatic service. Diplomatic service? Kenji stepped forward, his interest clearly piqued. Unlike his father, his skepticism was barely concealed. What kind of diplomatic service? David's response was measured professional. Economic attaché, United States Department of State. I specialized in trade negotiations and cultural bridge building. Dr. Rahman joined the conversation, his Malaysian accent coloring British-trained English. Harrison-san, if I may ask, what brought you to private sector work? The question carried weight, a test disguised as polite inquiry. David had faced such moments hundreds of times in his diplomatic career. The truth delivered with dignity was always stronger than evasion. Government downsizing, Dr. Rahman. My position was eliminated in 2022. David's voice remained steady. Sometimes change forces us toward opportunities we hadn't considered. Elena watched this exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just translation. This was diplomacy in real time, the careful dance of establishing credibility and trust before any serious business could begin. Please, Yamamoto gestured toward the table. Shall we sit? As they moved to their seats, David caught Elena's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. The seating arrangement was perfect, Yamamoto and Kenji on one side, Rahman and his associates on the other, Elena and David positioned to facilitate rather than dominate. Before we begin, Elena said once everyone was settled, I want to express my gratitude for your willingness to consider this partnership. Morrison Industries has tremendous respect for both Yamamoto Corporation and Rahman Group. We're not here to propose a takeover or acquisition. We're here to explore how three companies with complementary strengths might build something none of us could achieve alone. David translated her words into Japanese for Yamamoto, then Malay for Rahman, not just converting language but adjusting tone and emphasis to resonate with each culture. In Japanese, he emphasized the concept of mutual respect in long-term relationship building. In Malay, he highlighted practical benefits and family-like loyalty between business partners. Yamamoto nodded thoughtfully. Ms. Morrison, your reputation in supply chain innovation is impressive. But we must ask, why does Morrison Industries need partners? Well, your company has been successful independently. Elena's moment of truth. David watched her carefully, ready to help navigate cultural nuances, but the response had to be authentically hers. You're right to ask, Elena said. We don't need partners to survive. We need partners to thrive. The technology we've developed in supply chain optimization could revolutionize manufacturing efficiency, but only if we can scale globally. Yamamoto Corporation has the manufacturing expertise and Asian market penetration we need. Rahman Group has the Malaysian production capabilities and Southeast Asian distribution networks that would complete the triangle. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We could try to build those capabilities ourselves over the next decade, or we could partner with the companies that already do these things better than anyone in the world. David translated, but added subtle emphasis that would resonate culturally. For Yamamoto, he emphasized the concept of building on existing excellence rather than starting from zero, a principle deeply valued in Japanese business culture. For Rahman, he stressed the practical efficiency and mutual benefit aspects. Doraemon leaned forward. Ms. Morrison, your transparency is appreciated, but let's discuss specifics. What exactly are you proposing in terms of structure? Tripartite partnership, Elena replied. Not a merger, not an acquisition. A strategic alliance where each company maintains its identity and core strengths while sharing certain capabilities and markets. Morrison provides supply chain technology and North American market access. Yamamoto provides manufacturing excellence and East Asian penetration. Rahman provides production capacity and Southeast Asian distribution. Kenji had been silent through the translations, but now he spoke up, his English crisp and direct. Ms. Morrison, that sounds idealistic. How do you propose to handle disputes? Profit sharing, decision-making authority. These partnerships often fail because the details weren't properly addressed up front. Elena glanced at David, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Kenji's directness was a test he was pushing to see if they'd prepared beyond pleasant generalities. Mr. Kenji, Elena said, you're absolutely right. That's why we've prepared detailed proposals for each of those areas. She nodded to Rebecca, who began distributing bound documents. But before we dive into legal structures, I'd like to share something that might provide context. And Elena looked at David, then back at the group. David, would you tell them about the connection our families share? David felt a moment of surprise. Elena was taking a significant risk leading with the personal connection rather than letting it emerge naturally. But her instinct was sound. Sometimes bold moves were necessary to establish trust. Yamamoto-san, so David began in Japanese, then continued in English for the others. My father, Robert Harrison, was a civil engineer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during Tokyo Reconstruction, 1947 to 1954. He worked closely with your father, Yamamoto Ichiro, on infrastructure projects. Yamamoto's composure flickered. He exchanged rapid Japanese with his son, then looked back at David with new intensity. Yamamoto Ichiro was my grandfather, Kenji said in English, his skepticism replaced by curiosity. He died when I was young, but I remember his stories about working with the American engineers after the war. Harrison-san. Yamamoto's voice had grown warmer. Your father, Robert Harrison. He worked on the Sumida Bridge project. David nodded, among others. He often talked about your father. Said Ichiro-san taught him that former enemies could become lasting partners if they built trust through shared work. Yamamoto was silent for a long moment processing this revelation. When he spoke, it was in Japanese, his words formal, but carrying emotional weight. My father spoke of Robert Harrison many times. He said the American engineer understood that building bridges meant more than engineering. It meant connecting people. David translated for the others, then responded in Japanese. My father felt the same about Ichiro-san. He said their collaboration taught him that partnership based on mutual respect could create something stronger than either party could achieve alone. The room's energy had shifted. Dr. Rahman watched this exchange with growing interest, understanding that he was witnessing something deeper than business negotiation. He was seeing the foundation of trust being laid across generational lines. This connection between our families, Yamamoto said, returning to English, it provides context, but business must stand on its own merits. What do you propose as next steps? Elena leaned forward slightly. 60-day trial partnership. We begin immediate collaboration on 3 pilot projects, one in each of our primary markets. If the results meet predetermined benchmarks, we formalize the long-term partnership. If not, we part ways with goodwill and compensation for time invested. 60 days is very short, Dr. Rahman observed. How do you propose to evaluate success so quickly? David stepped in, having anticipated this concern. Dr. Rahman, we're not asking you to revolutionize your entire operation in 60 days. The pilot projects would be carefully selected to demonstrate specific synergies. For example, Morrison's supply chain technology integrated with one of Yamamoto's production lines in Japan, while Rahman provides specialized components through their Malaysian facilities. He pulled out his tablet, bringing up preliminary projections. Success would be measured by 3 metrics: efficiency improvements, cost reductions, and quality indicators. All parties would need to see minimum 15% improvement in their respective areas. Kenji studied the numbers, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional interest. These projections seem aggressive but not unrealistic. What happens if one partner meets benchmarks, but another doesn't? Graduated partnership, Elena replied. If 2 of 3 parties meet benchmarks, those 2 continue while compensating the third for their participation. We're not asking anyone to fail together. The conversation continued for another hour, diving into legal structures, intellectual property sharing, and risk mitigation. David translated technical concepts and cultural nuances, ensuring that nothing was lost between languages or worldviews. Finally, Yamamoto sat back in his chair. Ms. Morrison, Harrison-san, Dr. Rahman, we have covered much ground today. I believe we need time to consider what we have discussed. Elena nodded. Of course, what timeline would be comfortable for your considerations? 1 week, Yamamoto said. We will provide our decision by this time next week. As the formal meeting concluded, the group moved toward more informal conversation. David found himself in quiet discussion with the Yamamoto while Elena spoke with Dr. Rahman near the windows. Harrison-san, Yamamoto said in Japanese, "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Yamamoto-san. You mentioned government downsizing ended your diplomatic career. But a man with your skills, surely there were other opportunities in international business." David considered his answer carefully. The truth he'd learned was often more powerful than diplomatic polish. "Yamamoto-san, the market for 50-year-old diplomats is limited. Companies prefer younger, less expensive talent. I had family obligations, my daughter's education, my mother's care that required immediate income rather than extended job searching." Yamamoto nodded slowly. "So you became a driver." "I became whatever was necessary to meet my responsibilities." "And Ms. Morrison knew nothing of your background." David smiled slightly. "I was invisible, Yamamoto-san. Sometimes we see only what we expect to see." Yamamoto was quiet for a moment, then spoke in English, loudly enough for Elena to hear. "Ms. Morrison, you have an unusual advisor in Harrison-san." Elena turned from her conversation with Dr. Rahman. "I'm learning that, Yamamoto-san." "In my experience," Yamamoto continued, "the most valuable people are often those who prove themselves through action before seeking recognition. Harrison-san has done this." The compliment hung in the air as the meeting drew to its natural close. Business cards were exchanged with appropriate ceremony. David had briefed Elena on the ritual, ensuring she used both hands and read each card carefully before placing it respectfully on the table. As the participants gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Dr. Rahman approached David. "Harrison-san, might I ask what made you certain this partnership structure would appeal to all three companies?" David considered the question. "Dr. Rahman, I spent 27 years in rooms where the failure to understand different motivations could have serious consequences. Yamamoto Corporation values legacy and long-term relationship building. Rahman Group values practical efficiency and family-like loyalty. Morrison Industries values innovation and growth. The partnership structure gives each company what they value most while asking them to sacrifice nothing essential." Rahman smiled. "You read people well, Harrison-san. I suspect this is not the last international negotiation you will handle." As the Japanese and Malaysian delegations departed, Elena and David found themselves alone in the elegant suite. The white peonies still sat in their crystal vases, witnesses to an afternoon that had changed everything. Elena walked to the windows overlooking Central Park. The rain had stopped and late afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, turning her hair golden. "David," she said without turning around, "in 3 hours you've done more for this company than I've been able to do in 6 months." David was gathering papers from the table. "You built something worth saving, Ms. Morrison. I just helped you show them what you'd already created." She turned to face him. "What happens now? Now we wait and prepare for either outcome. And if they say yes," David looked at her directly, "then we have 60 days to prove that partnership really can create something stronger than any of us could build alone." Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted from cautious optimism to concern. "Rebecca," she answered. "What's wrong?" David could hear Rebecca's voice through the speaker, tight with stress. "Elena, there's a problem. The preliminary due diligence report from Yamamoto's financial team just came in. They're questioning our cash flow projections. They want clarification on several revenue recognition issues before they make any commitments." Elena's face went pale. "How serious?" "Serious enough that they've requested a follow-up meeting with our CFO tomorrow morning before they give us their decision." David watched Elena's confidence waver. One meeting down, another hurdle ahead. The partnership wasn't secure. It was just beginning. "Set it up," Elena said finally. "But Rebecca, make sure Marcus has all the documentation ready, and ask David to join that meeting too." She ended the call and looked at David. "Think you can handle one more negotiation?" David straightened his tie, feeling the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. Not the burden of driving in silence, but the privilege of being seen, being needed, being essential. "Mr. Morrison," he said with a slight smile, "I've been preparing for this my entire career. I'm not stopping now." As they left the St. Regis together, walking into Manhattan evening light, David thought about bridges, the kind his father had built from concrete and steel, and the kind he was learning to build from trust and understanding. Some bridges carried traffic, others carried hope. Tonight he was building both. But tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges to navigate. The partnership was possible but not yet certain, and David Harrison, no longer invisible, would need every skill he'd learned in 27 years of diplomacy to help Morrison Industries cross the bridge they'd started building together. The real work was just beginning. 6:30 the next morning found David at Riverside Care, sitting beside his mother's bed as October's sunlight filtered through institutional curtains. Ruth Harrison lay propped against pillows, her silver hair neat despite the restless night. At 78, she still possessed moments of startling clarity that cut through the fog of advancing dementia like lighthouse beams through storm clouds. David. Her voice was soft but alert. You look different today. He'd been holding her hand, watching her sleep, thinking about bridge building and second chances. Different how, Mom? Taller, like you remember how to stand up straight. Her eyes still sharp when the disease allowed studied his face. Something happened. David smiled, feeling the weight of yesterday's revelations settling into something that might actually be hope. I got to do my job again, Mom. My real job. The diplomat. The diplomat. Ruth squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Tell me. So he did. He told her about Elena's crisis, about the phone call in Japanese, about revealing 3 years of hidden identity to save a company he'd only driven for. He told her about Yamamoto-san and the connection to his father's work rebuilding Tokyo 70 years ago. Ruth listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, her lucid moments stringing together like pearls on a thread. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Your father would be proud, she said finally. Out of the success, he'd expect that. Proud that you remembered who you were meant to be. David's throat tightened. Mom, I need to tell you something. The money for your care, I'm behind again. Riverside called yesterday. Ruth waved a dismissive hand. Money comes and goes. Purpose matters. She turned to face him fully, and for a moment the disease receded, leaving only the woman who'd raised him to build bridges instead of walls. Promise me something, David. Anything. Don't let fear make you small again. The world needs what you can do. Before David could respond, his phone rang. Elena's name on the screen. David, thank God. Are you available this morning? Yamamoto's financial team wants to meet at 9, and Marcus is having complications with the revenue recognition documentation. I need you there. David looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. I'll be there in an hour. Actually, Elena paused. Could you be there in 30 minutes? There's something else we need to discuss first. 20 minutes later, David sat in Elena's office, still wearing yesterday's suit, but with a fresh shirt Rebecca had somehow procured. Elena paced behind her desk, nervous energy radiating from her like heat. The financial meeting is real, she began, but it's not the only reason I called. David, I've been thinking all night about yesterday, about what you did, who you are, what this company could be with someone like you helping to lead it. David felt something shift in the air between them. Ms. Morrison, Elena, please. After yesterday, I think we can dispense with the formalities. She stopped pacing, faced him directly. I want to offer you a position, not as my driver, not as a translator or cultural advisor, as Chief International Officer of Morrison Industries. The words hung in the office like a physical presence. David felt his carefully constructed equilibrium tilt. Elena, that's... He struggled to process what she was offering. That's incredibly generous. But I don't understand. We don't even know if the partnership will happen. That's exactly why I need you. Elena moved to the windows overlooking Manhattan, her reflection ghosted in glass. David, yesterday you saved this company. But more than that, you showed me what leadership actually looks like. You didn't grandstand or demand credit. You didn't make yourself the center of attention. You built bridges and let others walk across them safely. She turned back to him. I want to learn how to do that, and I want you to help me build an international division that operates on those principles. David's mind raced through implications. A real position, a career resurrection, enough income to secure Jessica's future and his mother's care. Everything he'd lost 3 years ago returned not through pity, but through merit. What would it involve? Leading our expansion into Asian and European markets, building partnerships like the one we started yesterday, representing Morrison Industries in international negotiations. Elena smiled, basically being the diplomat you always were, but in the private sector. Before David could respond, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. Elena, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Yamamoto's team just arrived. They're setting up in conference room A. Elena looked at David. Think about the offer, but right now we have 65 jobs to save. The financial meeting tested every skill David had developed in 27 years of diplomacy. Yamamoto's CFO, Tanaka-san, was methodical and precise, dissecting Morrison Industries' financial projections with surgical precision. Ramon's financial advisor, Duchen, approached numbers with the skepticism of someone who'd seen too many partnerships fail due to optimistic accounting. Marcus Webb Morrison's CFO was competent, but clearly struggling under the multilingual pressure. Key concepts were getting lost in translation. Cultural nuances were being missed, and what should have been a straightforward review of financial documentation was turning into a minefield of misunderstanding. David stepped in, gradually translating not just language but intent. When Tanaka-san questioned cash flow timing, David explained the seasonal nature of Morrison's client base in terms that resonated with Japanese business cycles. When Dr. Chen worried about revenue recognition practices, David contextualizing American accounting standards within Malaysian regulatory frameworks. Slowly, the tension in the room eased. Questions were answered with precision. Concerns were addressed with transparency. By the end of 2 hours, both international teams seemed satisfied that Morrison Industries was a stable partner, not a desperate company seeking rescue. As the meeting concluded, Tanaka-san approached David with careful formality. Harrison-san, he said in Japanese, your ability to bridge these discussions has been invaluable. May I ask, what is your role at Morrison Industries? David glanced at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. As of today, Tanaka-san, I am Chief International Officer. Elena's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected him to accept so quickly, but her smile confirmed that the decision was mutual. Excellent, Tanaka-san replied. Then we look forward to working with you in the weeks ahead. After the international teams departed, Elena and David found themselves in the conference room surrounded by financial documents and empty coffee cups. The morning light had shifted, casting long shadows across the polished table. So, Elena said, I guess you accepted the offer. David smiled. I guess I did. Any regrets? David thought about 3 years of silence, 3 years of swallowing his expertise, 3 years of being invisible while the world happened around him. None. Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression shifted to surprise. It's Yamamoto-san. He's calling directly. She answered on speaker. Yamamoto-san, good afternoon. Ms. Morrison Harrison-san, I hope this call finds you well. Yamamoto's voice carried warmth David hadn't heard in yesterday's formal meeting. I am calling to inform you that Yamamoto Corporation has decided to move forward with the partnership proposal. Elena's face lit up, but she kept her voice professional. That's wonderful news. We're honored by your confidence. Dr. Raman has also agreed to participate. We believe the structure you proposed offers genuine value for all 3 companies. Yamamoto paused. However, we have one condition. David felt Elena tense beside him. Of course. What condition? We want Harrison-san personally involved in the implementation phase. His understanding of our business culture and ability to facilitate complex discussions will be essential to the partnership's success. Elena looked at David with something approaching amazement. Mr. Yamamoto David has just accepted the position of Chief International Officer at Morrison Industries. He will absolutely be leading our side of the partnership implementation. Excellent. Then we have an agreement. Harrison-san, I look forward to working with you in the coming months. After the call ended, Elena and David sat in stunned silence. 3 days ago, Elena had been facing bankruptcy. David had been an invisible driver counting down to financial catastrophe. Now they were partners in an $800 million international venture. David, Elena said finally, I need you to know something. This offer, the CIO position, it's not charity. You've earned this. David nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. I know. And Elena, you saved my life yesterday when you asked what languages I speak. But more than that, you gave me the chance to remember who I was meant to be. They were interrupted by David's phone ringing, Jessica's name on the screen. Dad, his daughter's voice carried excitement and confusion in equal measure. Dad, something incredible just happened. Stanford just called. They're offering me a full scholarship for my final year. They said it's based on academic merit, but also on a recommendation from an unnamed benefactor with connections to Japanese medical research institutions. David looked at Elena, who held up her hands with an innocent expression that fooled no one. Jessica, that's amazing. You earned every bit of that scholarship. Dad, there's more. They also mentioned that if I'm interested in pediatric oncology, there might be research opportunities through partnership programs with Yamamoto Medical Division. The scholarship coordinator said someone specifically recommended me based on my research interests and family circumstances. After the call ended, David turned to Elena. You didn't have to. I didn't do anything, Elena said, but her smile betrayed her. I may have mentioned to Yamamoto-san that I worked with someone who had a brilliant daughter studying medicine, and I may have suggested that Yamamoto Medical's research partnerships could benefit from connecting with promising young American doctors. Everything else was based on Jessica's own merit. David felt overwhelming gratitude not just for the help, but for Elena's understanding that the assistance had to be earned, not given. His phone rang again, this time Riverside Care. Mr. Harrison, this is Margaret. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's conversation about your mother's account. The voice was gentler than he remembered. We've received a payment that covers the outstanding balance plus 3 months in advance. We also received authorization to proceed with the enhanced care program your mother qualifies for. David looked at Elena questioningly. She held up her hands again. I called this morning and asked about corporate bereavement support programs for key employees. It's a legitimate business expense. Elena, David, you're about to become the most important person in this company's international expansion. Your mother's care is not charity, it's an investment in making sure you can focus on the work we need you to do. David felt his professional composure crack slightly. 3 years of struggle, 3 years of impossible choices between family and survival, 3 years of shrinking into invisibility, and in 24 hours everything had changed. But as he looked at Elena, he realized the change hadn't happened to him. The change had happened in him yesterday afternoon when he decided to stop being invisible and start building bridges again. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for saving my company. Thank you for showing me what leadership looks like. Thank you for reminding me that the best partnerships are built on seeing the value in each other. That evening, David returned to Riverside Care to have dinner with his mother. Ruth was having one of her clearer days, and they sat together in the small dining room as sunset painted the windows gold. So, Ruth said, picking at her chicken, "Tell me about today." David had intended to share the professional developments the CIO positioned, the partnership success, the financial security. But as he looked at his mother, he realized those weren't the most important changes. Today I remembered something you taught me when I was young, he said, about the difference between being invisible and being ignored. Ruth raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure I remember that particular lesson. You said that being invisible is something that happens to you, but being ignored is a choice you make. For 3 years, I thought the world had made me invisible, but really I'd made myself ignorable. Ruth smiled, her eyes brightening with understanding. And today, I decided to be seen again. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to twinkle beyond the windows. As visiting hours drew to a close, Ruth took David's hand. Your father built bridges from concrete and steel, she said, but you build bridges from understanding and respect. Both kinds connect people who need to find each other. David kissed his mother's forehead and promised to visit tomorrow. As he walked to his car, the same Continental he'd driven for Elena for 3 years, he thought about bridges and second chances and the moment when invisibility becomes impossible. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Dad, I don't know what changed, but everything feels different today. Like the future just got bigger. Love you to the moon and back. David sat in the driver's seat for a moment, looking up at Riverside Care's lighted windows. Somewhere in there, his mother was settling in for the night, no longer worried about payment deadlines or alternative arrangements. Somewhere in California, his daughter was planning a medical career without the weight of financial uncertainty. And tomorrow morning, David Harrison would walk into Morrison Industries not as a driver, not as invisible help, but as Chief International Officer responsible for building partnerships across cultures and languages and worldviews. He started the car and pulled into Manhattan traffic, thinking about the Japanese saying Yamamoto-san had shared yesterday, Nana Kurobi Yaoki, fall 7 times, rise 8 times. David had fallen exactly once 3 years ago when budget cuts eliminated his position and his identity. But he'd risen into something stronger. Not just a diplomat, but a bridge builder who understood that the most important connections happen between people who need each other even when they don't realize it yet. As he drove through the city, where he'd learned to be invisible and then chosen to be seen again, David thought about all the bridges waiting to be built, all the connections waiting to be made, all the partnerships that could create something stronger than any individual could achieve alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, new opportunities to build understanding between cultures and companies and people who spoke different languages but shared common hopes. Tonight, though, David Harrison drove home through Manhattan traffic no longer invisible, no longer small, carrying the knowledge that sometimes the most profound transformations happen not when circumstances change, but when we remember who we were always meant to be. The bridges you build in darkness, his father had always said, still stand when the sun rises. David had spent 3 years building bridges in darkness, bridges of patience, bridges of preparation, bridges of hope. Now the sun was rising, and those bridges were strong enough to carry everything he dreamed of creating. Some stories end with dramatic rescues or grand gestures. This one ended with something quieter but no less transformative. A man remembering his worth, a woman learning to see beyond her own assumptions, and two people building the kind of partnership that makes everyone stronger. David parked in front of his small apartment building, looked up at the star barely visible through Manhattan's glow, and smiled. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of his career, the rest of his life, the rest of his journey as someone who builds bridges for a living. He was ready. Stories like David's happen more often than we might think, people falling through cracks, finding themselves invisible in plain sight, then discovering that their greatest struggles often prepare them for their most important contributions. Sometimes the skills we think we've lost are exactly what someone desperately needs. Sometimes the bridges we build in darkness are the ones that matter most when the light returns. If you're going through a season where you feel unseen or undervalued, remember David's story. Your experience matters. Your expertise counts. And sometimes the moment when everything changes starts with someone asking the right question. What languages do you speak? Thank you for joining us for this story of second chances in bridge building. If it touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're never truly invisible. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to be seen. Until next time, keep building bridges. Keep remembering your worth. Keep believing that the best partnerships happen when people choose to see the value in each other. They're always worth it.